The moment I stepped into the grand hall of the Cresthaven estate, a chill ran through me. Not from the cold marble floors or the towering crystal chandeliers, but from the weight of a secret I'd carried for years. The invitation in my hand was crisp, embossed with gold, promising an evening of opulence and celebration. Miss Eleanor Vayne. It read, "You are cordially invited to the Cresthaven Gala." I should have burned it the moment it arrived. Instead, I stood there, dressed in a gown of midnight silk, my heart pounding like a war drum, knowing that tonight, the past I'd buried would rise like a specter to confront me. The Cresthaven estate was a monument to old wealth-sprawling gardens, oak-paneled walls, and a legacy of power that stretched back centuries. The Vaynes were outsiders, always had been. Despite my father's fortune, my presence here was no mere courtesy. It was a summons, a calculated move by Lady Margaret Cresthaven, my late husband's mother, to remind me of my place, or so I thought. As I handed my invitation to the stern-faced butler, his eyes lingered on me. A flicker of recognition he quickly masked. "No record of your attendance." "Madam," he said, his voice clipped, his gaze cold. My stomach twisted. This was no mistake. This was Margaret's opening gambit. I stood straighter, refusing to falter. "There must be some error," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. "I was personally invited by Lady Cresthaven herself." The butler's lips tightened, but before he could respond, a voice sliced through the air, sharp and familiar, dripping with venom. "Eleanor, darling, did you really think you'd be welcome here?" Margaret Cresthaven emerged from the shadowed archway, her emerald gown shimmering like a serpent's scales, her silver hair coiled like a crown. Behind her, my husband's siblings, Lillian and Theodore, watched from their velvet chairs, their smirks barely concealed. The air grew thick with the weight of their stares. Other guests, lords, ladies, and titans of industry turned to watch, their whispers buzzing like flies. Margaret's smile was a blade, honed over years of wielding power. "This is a family affair, Eleanor," she said, her tone syrupy with false pity. "Cresthaven is for those who belong. Perhaps a tavern in the lower districts would suit you better." Lillian's laugh was a cruel chime, Theodore's silence louder than words. My husband, Julian, sat rigid, his knuckles white around his glass, his eyes fixed on the table. He said nothing. He never did. The humiliation should have crushed me. For years, Margaret had made it clear I was beneath her son, a merchant's daughter, not born to their world of titles and tradition. From the day Julian and I were betrothed, she'd woven her disdain into every interaction. A forgotten invitation to a ball, a pointed remark about my common manners, gifts for Julian that underscored my exclusion. But tonight was different. Tonight, she'd orchestrated a public spectacle, ensuring I'd be turned away at the gates of her kingdom, left to slink back to the shadows. She expected me to break, but I didn't. Something inside me hardened, like steel forged in fire. I smiled, slow and deliberate, meeting her gaze. "Please summon Lord Cresthaven," I said to the butler, my voice calm but unyielding. Margaret laughed, a sound like shattering glass. "Do you think my husband will come running because you demand it?" I held her stare, unflinching. "Yes," I said, "because Lord Cresthaven and I have history. And tonight, Margaret, you're about to learn just how deep it runs." Her smirk faltered, just for a heartbeat. The air crackled with anticipation. I stood my ground, a lone figure in a sea of wealth and judgment. Knowing the truth I'd kept buried for a decade was about to surface. And when it did, Margaret Cresthaven would regret ever thinking she could cast me out. Margaret's eyes narrowed, but her composure held, a mask of aristocratic disdain. "History," she said, her voice laced with mockery. "What could you possibly share with my husband?" The crowd leaned in, their curiosity a tangible weight. I could feel Julian's gaze on me now, heavy with questions he'd never dared ask. Lillian whispered something to Theodore, her lips curling in amusement. They thought this was a game they'd already won. They were wrong. The butler hesitated, caught between Margaret's authority and my quiet confidence. Before he could decide, a deep voice cut through the tension. "Eleanor." Lord Alistair Cresthaven stepped into the hall, his presence commanding despite the years etched into his face. Tall, with silver hair and a tailored suit that spoke of effortless power. He was the patriarch of this dynasty. His eyes met mine, and for a moment, the room faded. There was no mistaking the warmth in his expression. Not the polite detachment of a host, but something deeper, something personal. "Alistair," I said, my smile softening. "It's been too long." His gaze flicked to Margaret, then back to me, a spark of understanding passing between us. Margaret's posture stiffened, her fingers tightening on her jeweled clutch. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. I turned to her, my tone light but deliberate. "It seems my invitation was overlooked. An honest mistake?" "I'm sure." Alistair's lips twitched, suppressing a smile. "An oversight indeed," he said smoothly. "Eleanor is always welcome here." The room stilled. Lillian's glass paused halfway to her lips. Theodore's smirk vanished. Julian's jaw clenched, his silence deafening. Margaret's face remained a mask, but her eyes betrayed to her a flicker of doubt, a crack in her unassailable confidence. "Welcome," she said, forcing a laugh. "This is absurd. Cresthaven is no place for her kind." Alistair's expression cooled, his voice firm. "Eleanor is not a guest. Margaret, she is family." The word landed like a thunderclap. Lillian gasped. Theodore leaned forward, and Julian's glass hit the table with a dull thud. Margaret's laugh was brittle now, her control slipping. "Family," she said, her tone incredulous. "She's Julian's wife. Nothing more. She has no claim to this house." I stepped closer, my voice low but clear, carrying to the nearest tables. Before I married Julian, Alistair was my mentor, my guide. He taught me everything I know about this world. Your world. Margaret's jaw tightened. This was not the script she'd written. I pressed on, my words deliberate. I wasn't born to wealth, Margaret. I clawed my way up, working in the shadows of places like this. Alistair saw something in me. He trained me, shaped me, believed in me when no one else did. Alistair nodded, his voice warm but resolute. Eleanor was exceptional. She learned faster than anyone I've ever taught. She earned her place here, Margaret, long before you ever knew her name. The butler, sensing the shift, snapped to attention. "Shall I prepare a seat, Miss Eleanor?" he asked, his tone deferential. I nodded, my smile sharp. "Please." Margaret's face flushed, a rare break in her polished veneer. "This is outrageous," she hissed. "You think you can waltz in here because you once poured wine for my husband?" I leaned in, my voice a whisper meant only for her. "What's outrageous is that you thought you could erase me." The waiter appeared, setting a place at the head of the table, right beside Alistair. Margaret's hands balled into fists. This was her battlefield, and I had just seized control. The table was a masterpiece of decadence crystal stemware. Silver cutlery, a centerpiece of roses that cost more than most people's rent. I sat, my posture perfect, as the waiter placed a delicate amuse-bouche before me, a gift from Alistair himself. Margaret's eyes burned, but she said nothing, her silence a concession she couldn't afford to voice. Julian stared at his plate, his fork unmoving. Lillian and Theodore exchanged glances, their earlier amusement replaced by unease. The other guests pretended to focus on their meals, but their ears were tuned to our table. I took a sip of wine, savoring its richness as much as the tension in the air. Margaret recovered quickly, her voice smooth as she addressed me. "Well, Eleanor, I must say, you've adapted remarkably to our standards." The barb was subtle, wrapped in a veneer of civility, but its intent was clear, a reminder that I was an outsider, a pretender in her domain. I smiled, unruffled. Adaptation is survival. "Margaret, something I learned long before I met your son." Her lips twitched, a crack in her armor. "Survival," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "How quaint. I suppose that's what comes from your humble beginnings?" Lillian snickered, but it was forced, lacking her earlier confidence. Theodore shifted in his seat, his eyes darting to Alistair, who watched the exchange with quiet amusement. Julian remained silent, his cowardice a weight I could no longer ignore. I set my glass down, my movements deliberate. "Humble beginnings," I said, my voice carrying a quiet strength. "I built myself from nothing. Margaret, no trust funds, no titles, just hard work and Alistair's guidance. Can you say the same?" The table fell silent, the air heavy with the truth I'd laid bare. Margaret's smile tightened, her knuckles white against her napkin. "Are you suggesting I haven't earned my place?" she asked, her voice low, dangerous. I tilted my head, my smile unwavering. "I'm saying I don't need to borrow someone else's name to claim mine." Lillian choked on her wine. Theodore's jaw dropped. Julian's eyes finally met mine, but I looked away. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about me, about the years I'd spent swallowing Margaret's slights, enduring her calculated cruelty, all while Julian sat by, complicit in his silence. "Tonight, that ended." Margaret leaned forward, her voice a venomous whisper. "You think you're clever, Eleanor, but you're still just the merchant's daughter who married up." I laughed, the sound startling her. "And you're the woman who thinks a title makes her untouchable." I gestured to Alistair, who raised his glass to me in silent support. "But here we are, at the same table, with the same respect from the man who runs this house. Funny how that works." The silence was deafening. Margaret's face was a mask of barely contained rage, her world tilting under the weight of my words. I picked up my fork, cutting into the dish before me with practiced grace. The food was exquisite, but the real victory was the crack I'd put in Margaret's armor. She had spent years trying to break me, to prove I didn't belong. Tonight, I'd shown her I didn't need her approval to claim my place, and this was only the beginning. The evening wore on, the tension, a living thing coiled around the table. Margaret tried to reclaim her dominance, her voice sharp as she addressed the guests, regaling them with tales of Cresthaven's storied past. But her words felt rehearsed, her authority hollow. Every time she spoke, I countered not with anger, but with quiet confidence, each word a brick in the wall I was building between her world and mine. Alistair watched, his amusement evident, while Julian's silence grew heavier, a weight I no longer carried. "Eleanor," Margaret said at last, her tone deceptively sweet. "You've certainly made an impression tonight, but let's be honest. Your place here is tied to my son. Without him, what are you?" The question was a dagger, meant to cut deep. Lillian leaned forward, eager for my response. Theodore's eyes gleamed with anticipation. The guests stilled, their forks pausing midair. Julian's head snapped up, his eyes meeting mine for the first time all evening. I set my glass down, my movement slow, deliberate. "What am I said, my voice steady, carrying to every corner of the room. "I'm the woman who built herself from nothing, the woman who funded your son's ambitions, who carried his dreams when he couldn't." Margaret's smile froze, Lillian's breath caught. Theodore's smirk vanished, Julian's face paled, his hands trembling. I leaned forward, my voice low but unyielding. "You think I'm here because of Julian? I'm here despite him." The silence was suffocating. Margaret's eyes widened, her world unraveling in real time. "What are you implying?" she demanded, her voice barely controlled. I smiled, cold and sharp. "I'm not implying anything, Margaret. I'm stating facts. Julian's success, his investments, his reputation, half of it was built with my money, my vision, my sacrifice." Lillian gasped. Theodore stared at Julian, seeking confirmation, but Julian said nothing, his silence damning him. I stood, smoothing my gown, my voice calm but final. "You've spent years trying to make me feel small, Margaret. But the truth is, I've been the one holding this family together, and I'm done pretending otherwise." I turned to Alistair, who nodded, his respect unwavering. "Thank you for the evening, Alistair. It was illuminating." Then I walked out, leaving Margaret's carefully constructed world in pieces behind me. Outside, the night air was cool, brushing against my skin like a whisper of freedom. The stars above Cresthaven glittered, indifferent to the drama unfolding below. I walked to my car, my steps measured, my mind racing. This wasn't just a victory over Margaret, it was a declaration of war. She'd spent years trying to erase me, to reduce me to a footnote in her son's life. Tonight, I'd shown her I was no shadow, but the real battle was just beginning. I pulled out my phone, my fingers steady as I typed a message to my attorney. "Clara, initiate the plan. Tomorrow morning?" Her response was immediate. "Understood. Documents will be ready by noon." I exhaled, slipping the phone back into my purse. Divorce. The word didn't scare me anymore. What scared me was how long I'd stayed, how many years I'd let Julian's silence and Margaret's cruelty chip away at me. But no more. Tonight had been the final push. The moment I realized I didn't need their world, I could build my own. I drove to the city, the Cresthaven estate fading in my rearview mirror. My destination was the penthouse, a sleek tower of glass and steel that Julian believed he owned. He was wrong. I'd purchased it years ago, using the profits from my own investments. Investments he'd never bothered to understand. The doorman greeted me with a nod, his familiarity a quiet comfort. "Good evening, Miss Vayne," he said, holding the door. I smiled. "Good evening, Henry." The penthouse was a sanctuary of modern elegance, clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of the city that stretched to the horizon. I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by the window, watching the lights below. This was my domain, my victory. Margaret thought she could humiliate me, but she'd underestimated me. They all had. Julian's silence tonight wasn't just cowardice, it was complicity. He'd chosen his mother's world over me, just as he always had. And now, I was choosing myself. My phone buzzed. A message from Julian. "Eleanor, can we talk?" I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button. For a moment, I considered responding, giving him the chance to explain. But then I remembered his silence, the way he'd let Margaret tear me down without a word. I set the phone down, unanswered. There was nothing left to say. Tomorrow, Clara would deliver the divorce papers, along with the financial documents that would unravel Julian's world. He'd learn the truth that his empire was built on my foundation, and I was ready to reclaim it. Morning broke over the city, sunlight streaming through the penthouse windows. I sat at the dining table, coffee in hand, reviewing the documents Clara had sent. They were meticulous, every detail a testament to my years of quiet planning. Bank statements, investment records, contracts, all proving that I was the financial backbone of Julian's success. He'd never questioned where the money came from, assuming it was his birthright. That was his mistake. Clara arrived at noon, her briefcase brimming with the tools of my liberation. "You're sure about this?" she asked, her eyes sharp but kind. I nodded. I've never been more certain. She slid the divorce papers toward me, along with a folder labeled Cresthaven Investments. Inside was the contract that tied Julian's most lucrative ventures to my initial funding, a contract he'd signed without reading, assuming I'd always be there to prop him up. I smiled, signing my name with the flourish. "Let's make it official." Clara's lips curved, Margaret's going to lose her mind when she sees this. I laughed, a sound that felt lighter than it had in years. Good, she's earned it. Clara left, promising to file the papers by the end of the day. I leaned back, the weight of the moment settling over me. This wasn't just about leaving Julian, it was about dismantling the illusion Margaret had built. The lie that I was nothing without her son. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Julian. Eleanor, please. I didn't mean for things to go this way. I stared at the words, feeling a flicker of pity. Not for him, but for the man I'd once thought he was. I'd loved him, or at least the idea of him, a man who could stand by my side, who could match my strength. But Julian had never been that man. He'd hidden behind his mother's power, letting her fight his battles while I carried the weight of our life together. I typed a response. You made your choice, Julian. Now live with it. Then I blocked his number. There was no going back. The Cresthaven Gala had been the final straw, but it wasn't the first. I thought of the countless times Margaret had humiliated me, her snide remarks at our engagement party, the way she'd forgotten to invite my family to our wedding, the Christmas she'd gifted me a book on proper etiquette while Julian watched, silent. Each moment had been a cut, and I'd bled quietly, telling myself it wasn't worth the fight. But last night, I'd seen the truth. Julian would never choose me, and I didn't need him to. The divorce papers were served that afternoon. Clara called to confirm, her voice tinged with satisfaction. Julian's lawyer is scrambling. They weren't expecting this. I smiled, standing at the penthouse window, the city sprawling below me. They never do. Clara chuckled. Margaret's already called him 3 times, demanding a meeting. She thinks she can bully her way out of this. I sipped my coffee, the warmth grounding me. Let her try. By evening, the news had spread. My phone lit up with messages from old friends, colleagues, even distant relatives, all shocked that I'd finally taken a stand. A few expressed concern. Margaret's influence was vast, her wrath legendary. But I wasn't afraid. I'd spent years in her shadow, learning her game, studying her weaknesses. She thrived on control, on making others feel small. But I wasn't small anymore. I met Clara for dinner at a quiet bistro, far from the glittering world of Cresthaven, over wine and candlelight. We reviewed the next steps. The investment firm is the key, Clara said, tapping the folder. You own 51% of Cresthaven Ventures. Julian's name is on the letterhead, but you hold the power. I nodded, flipping through the documents. He never read the fine print. Clara raised her glass. His loss. We discussed the strategy, demand a full audit of the firm, expose Julian's mismanagement, and leverage my majority stake to take control. It wasn't just about money. It was about showing Margaret that her precious dynasty was a house of cards, built on my foundation. Clara leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. You could walk away with everything: the firm, the penthouse, even the summer estate in the hills. I smiled, but it was bittersweet. I don't want everything. I just want what's mine. That night, I slept better than I had in years. The weight of Julian's silence, Margaret's cruelty, was gone. In its place was clarity, purpose. I dreamed of the Cresthaven Gala, of Margaret's face as I'd turned her world upside down. But in the dream, it wasn't just her I faced, it was Julian, his eyes pleading, his voice weak. Eleanor, I'm sorry, he said. I woke before I could respond, the words lingering in the dark. Sorry wasn't enough. Not anymore. The next morning, I received a call from Alistair. His voice was warm, but there was an edge to it. A warning. Margaret's furious. Eleanor, she's calling in favors, trying to discredit you. I stood at the penthouse window, watching the city wake. Let her. She'll find I'm not so easy to erase. Alistair chuckled. I never doubted you, but be careful, she's not used to losing. I thanked him, my heart swelling with gratitude. Alistair had been my mentor, my guide through a world that had tried to chew me up. Now, he was my ally. I spent the day preparing, meeting with Clara and a team of accountants to review Cresthaven Ventures' books. The numbers told a story Julian would never admit. Years of reckless investments, propped up by my capital. Without me, the firm would have collapsed long ago. Clara's eyes gleamed as she pointed to a line in the ledger. This is your leverage. Eleanor, he can't fight this. I nodded, my resolve hardening. This wasn't revenge, it was justice. By afternoon, Julian's lawyer reached out, requesting a meeting. I agreed, but on my terms, my office, my rules. The meeting was set for the next day, and I spent the evening reviewing every contract, every transaction. I wasn't just fighting for my share, I was fighting for my legacy. Margaret had spent years trying to paint me as a gold digger, a nobody who'd latched onto her son. but the truth was uglier for her. I'd been the one holding up her precious family name. That night, I walked through the penthouse, running my fingers over the furniture, the art, the life I'd built. This wasn't Julian's world, it was mine. I thought of the early days, when I'd worked double shifts to fund his dreams, when I'd stayed up late crafting business plans he'd take credit for. I'd believed in him, in us. But belief wasn't enough when it wasn't returned. Julian had let his mother's poison seep into our marriage, and I'd let myself think I could change him. That was my mistake, but it was one I wouldn't repeat. The meeting with Julian's lawyer was a battlefield of words, all polished smiles and veiled threats. Clara sat beside me, her presence a quiet strength. Julian's lawyer, a man named Grayson, with slick hair and a sharper suit, opened with pleasantries, but I cut him off. "Let's skip the formalities," I said, sliding the investment contract across the table. "This proves I own 51% of Cresthaven Ventures. Your client's empire is mine." Grayson's smile didn't waver, but his eyes betrayed him nervous. "Calculating. Mrs. Vayne, surely we can come to an agreement. Julian is prepared to offer a generous settlement." I laughed, the sound sharp enough to make him flinch. Generous. He wouldn't have a dime without me. Clara laid out the financials, her voice cold and precise. Eleanor funded the firm's initial ventures. Without her, Julian would be bankrupt. She's not asking for a settlement. She's taking what's hers. Grayson shifted, his confidence fraying. "Margaret Cresthaven has instructed us to contest this. She believes I held up a hand, cutting him off. Margaret doesn't get a vote. This is between me and Julian. And if he wants to fight, I'll bury him in court." Grayson paled, knowing I meant it. The documents were ironclad, my position unassailable. Julian had signed his own downfall years ago, too arrogant to read the fine print. I leaned forward, my voice low. "Tell Julian he has two choices. Walk away quietly, or lose everything publicly. I'm done playing nice." Grayson gathered his papers, his retreat a silent admission of defeat. Clara smirked as he left. "That was almost too easy," she said. I shook my head. "It's not over. Margaret won't let it go." Clara nodded, her eyes sharp. "Then we hit her where it hurts her pride." That evening, I received a call from Lillian. Her voice was hesitant, a far cry from her usual smugness. "Eleanor, can we meet? I want to talk." I paused, weighing her motives. Lillian had always been Margaret's shadow, echoing her cruelty. But something in her tone felt different fear, perhaps, or guilt. I agreed to meet her the next day, curious but cautious. Margaret's empire was crumbling, and her children were starting to feel the tremors. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was rewriting the rules of their world. Lillian met me at a quiet cafe, her usual poise replaced by nervous fidgeting. She wore no makeup, her hair pulled back, as if trying to shed the Cresthaven armor. "Eleanor," she began, her voice low. I didn't know Mother would go that far at the gala. "I'm sorry." I studied her, searching for sincerity. "You laughed, Lillian. You thought it was funny." She winced, her eyes dropping to her coffee. "I know, I was wrong. I've always followed her lead. But you're not what she says you are." Her words surprised me, but I didn't let it show. "Why are you here, Lillian?" She hesitated, then met my gaze. "Mother's planning something. She's meeting with lawyers, digging into your past. She wants to ruin you." I leaned back, my smile cold. "Let her try. She'll find I'm not so easy to break." Lillian swallowed, her hands trembling. "I don't want to be part of it anymore. I want out." I raised an eyebrow. "Out. You're a Cresthaven." She shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm tired of being her pawn. Theodore is too. We're not like Julian. We don't want her war." Her admission was a crack in the Cresthaven facade, a sign that Margaret's grip was slipping. I leaned forward, my voice soft but firm. "If you want out, Lillian, you need to choose a side. Mine or hers." She nodded, her eyes wide. "Yours." I left the cafe with a new ally, but no illusions. Lillian's loyalty was fragile, born of fear rather than conviction. Still, it was a start. Margaret was losing her children, her control, her world, and I was just getting started. That night, I reviewed the financials again, mapping out my next move. Cresthaven Ventures wasn't just a company. It was a symbol of everything Margaret held dear. Taking it would be more than a financial blow. It would be a public humiliation, and I was ready to deliver. The next week was a whirlwind of strategy and steel. Clara and I met daily, refining our plan to seize control of Cresthaven Ventures. The board was nervous, sensing the shift in power. Julian's allies were defecting, unwilling to back a sinking ship. Margaret's influence still loomed, but it was fraying, her threats less effective with each passing day. I worked late into the night, poring over contracts, preparing for the inevitable showdown. Julian called again, his voice desperate. "Eleanor, please, let's work this out. I'll stand up to Mother. I swear." I laughed, the sound cold. "You had years to stand up to her. Julian, you chose silence." He pleaded, but I hung up, my heart steady. His promises were empty, his regret too late. I thought of the gala, of his cowardice as Margaret humiliated me. That memory fueled me, a fire that wouldn't die. Clara arranged a meeting with the board, scheduled for the following week. "This is it," she said, her eyes gleaming. "You present the financials, show them you're the majority shareholder, and demand control. They'll have no choice." I nodded, my mind sharp. This wasn't just about money. It was about rewriting the narrative. Margaret had spent years painting me as an outsider, a nobody. Now, I'd show her I was the one in charge. That evening, Alistair invited me to dinner at his private club, over whiskey and candlelight. He spoke plainly. "Margaret's desperate. Eleanor, she's pulling every string she has left." I sipped my drink, unfazed. "She's out of moves. Alistair, I've got the contracts, the board, the truth." He smiled, his eyes warm with pride. "I always knew you'd outshine them. But be careful, she's dangerous when cornered." I nodded, my resolve unshaken. Margaret could scheme all she wanted. I was ready. The board meeting was a battlefield, all polished wood and sharp suits. I stood at the head of the table, Clara at my side. The financials spread before me like a map of conquest. The directors, old men with older money, watched me with a mix of curiosity and unease. Julian sat across from me, his face pale, his lawyer at his elbow. Margaret wasn't there, but her presence lingered, a shadow over the room. I began, my voice steady, commanding. "Gentlemen, I hold 51% of Cresthaven Ventures. The contracts are clear. My capital built this firm. I'm here to assume control." Murmurs rippled through the room. Grayson, Julian's lawyer, stood, his voice smooth but desperate. "Mrs. Vayne's claims are exaggerated. Julian is the face of this company." I smiled, sliding the contract across the table. "The face, perhaps, but I'm the foundation." Clara presented the financials, each number a nail in Julian's coffin. The board listened, their expressions shifting from skepticism to grudging respect. One director, a grizzled man named Hargrove, leaned forward. "You're saying Julian's success is yours?" I nodded. "Every major investment, every profitable venture, my money, my strategy." Julian's eyes burned, but he said nothing, his silence damning him once again. The vote was swift. By a narrow margin, the board recognized my majority stake, granting me control. Grayson sputtered, but the decision was final. I looked at Julian, my voice calm but unyielding. "You can stay on as a figurehead, or you can leave. Your choice." He stared at me, his world crumbling. But I felt no pity. He'd made his bed years ago, when he'd chosen his mother over me. The news of my takeover hit the papers the next day. Headlines screamed of the Cresthaven coup, painting me as the merchant's daughter who'd toppled an empire. Margaret called, her voice shaking with rage. "You think you've won? Eleanor, you're nothing but a thief." I laughed, my voice cold. "A thief. I'm taking back what's mine." "Margaret, you should have read the contracts." She hung up, her silence a victory in itself. I moved into the Cresthaven Ventures office, my office. The next day, the staff watched me with a mix of awe and fear, unsure of what this new era meant. I wasted no time, restructuring the firm, cutting deadweight, and redirecting funds to projects I'd long championed. The work was grueling, but it felt right, like slipping into a role I'd been born to play. Alistair called to congratulate me, his voice warm. "You've done what I always knew you could. Eleanor, you've rewritten the game." Julian tried to meet me, showing up at the office unannounced. "Eleanor, please," he said, his voice breaking. "I didn't know how much you did for me." I studied him, the man I'd once loved, now small and broken. "You didn't want to know?" "Julian, that's the problem." I turned away, leaving him in the lobby, a relic of a life I no longer needed. Lillian reached out again, offering information on Margaret's next move, a smear campaign to paint me as a manipulator. I thanked her, my mind already working. Margaret's power was in her image, her reputation. I'd hit her there, exposing her cruelty to the world. The game wasn't over, but I was playing to win. Margaret's smear campaign began subtly, a whisper in the right ears, a carefully placed article questioning my motives. But I was ready. Clara and I leaked documents to the press, proving my role in Cresthaven Ventures' success. The narrative shifted overnight. I wasn't the gold digger Margaret painted me as, but a shrewd businesswoman who'd outmaneuvered a dynasty. The public ate it up, and Margaret's carefully curated image began to crack. I met with Lillian and Theodore, who'd both distanced themselves from their mother. "She's losing it," Theodore admitted, his voice low. "She's obsessed with destroying you." I nodded, unsurprised. "She can try, but I'm not the one who's vulnerable." Lillian handed me a folder, internal emails from Margaret, detailing her attempts to bribe board members. It was the ammunition I needed. That evening, I attended a charity gala, my first public appearance since the takeover. The room buzzed as I entered, heads turning, whispers following. I wore a gown of deep crimson, a deliberate contrast to Margaret's emerald. Alistair greeted me, his smile proud. You're the talk of the city. Eleanor. I laughed, raising my glass. Good. Let them talk. Margaret was there, her face a mask of fury. She approached, her voice low. Enjoy your moment. Eleanor. It won't last. I smiled, unflinching. It'll last longer than your legacy. Margaret. The night was a triumph. Each conversation a step toward solidifying my place in this world. I didn't need Cresthaven's approval anymore. I was creating my own empire, one built on truth, not titles. As I left, I caught Margaret's eye, her rage palpable. She'd underestimated me, and now she was paying the price. The next blow came swiftly. Using Lillian's emails, I exposed Margaret's bribery attempts to the board and the press. The fallout was immediate. Board members resigned, allies distanced themselves, and Margaret's reputation as the untouchable matriarch crumbled. The papers called it the fall of Cresthaven, and I was at the center of it all. Clara called, her voice gleeful. You've got her on the ropes. Eleanor, one more push, and she's done. I didn't revel in it. Not the way I thought I would. Destroying Margaret was necessary, but it wasn't joy, it was justice. I thought of the years I'd spent in her shadow, swallowing her insults, believing I had to prove myself to her world. Now, I saw the truth. I'd never needed her approval. I'd always been enough. Julian reached out one last time. A letter delivered to my office. Eleanor, I'm sorry. I failed you. I'll step away from the firm, from everything. Just please, don't destroy my family. I read it, then set it aside. His remorse was too late. His loyalty non-existent. I wrote back, a single line. You destroyed your family? Julian, not me. I didn't send it. There was no point. He'd made his choices, and I'd made mine. That night, I stood on the penthouse balcony, the city glittering below. I'd won, but the victory was bittersweet. I'd dismantled Margaret's world, taken control of Cresthaven Ventures, and reclaimed my life. But the cost was years of silence, of pretending I could change a man who'd never deserved me. I raised my glass to the stars, a silent toast to the woman I'd become. The weeks that followed were a blur of board meetings, press interviews, and restructuring Cresthaven Ventures. I appointed new directors, loyal to me, and redirected the firm's focus to sustainable investments projects Julian had dismissed as idealistic. The staff adapted quickly, their respect earned not by fear, but by results. The firm thrived, its profits soaring under my leadership. The papers called me the new Titan, a title I wore with pride. Margaret retreated from public life, her influence shattered. Lillian and Theodore distanced themselves, building their own paths outside her shadow. Alistair remained a steadfast ally, his support unwavering. You've changed the game. Eleanor, he said over dinner one evening. I always knew you would. I smiled, grateful for his faith. I had a good teacher. Julian disappeared, his name fading from the headlines. Rumors swirled he'd moved abroad, taken a job far below his former status. I didn't care. He was a ghost, a reminder of a life I'd outgrown. My focus was forward, on the empire I was building, on the legacy I'd create. I wasn't just Eleanor Vayne, merchant's daughter. I was Eleanor Vayne, architect of my own destiny. One evening, Clara invited me to a small gathering at her home, a celebration of our victory. The room was filled with friends, allies, and a few former Cresthaven staff who'd joined my team. Laughter filled the air, a stark contrast to the tension of the gala months ago. Clara raised a glass, her voice warm, to Eleanor, who turned to the tables and rewrote the rules. The room cheered, and for the first time, I felt truly free. I thought of Margaret, alone in her crumbling estate, her power stripped away. I thought of Julian, his silence a prison of his own making. And I thought of myself, the girl who'd once believed she needed their approval to belong. That girl was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her worth, who'd fought for it and won. As I left Clara's, I walked through the city, the night alive with a possibility. The stars above were the same ones that had watched me that night at Cresthaven. But now they felt like allies, not judges. I'd faced Margaret's cruelty, Julian's betrayal, and come out stronger. The world was mine to shape, and I was just beginning. Months later, Cresthaven Ventures was unrecognizable, a beacon of innovation, not tradition. I launched a foundation to support women entrepreneurs, funding dreams like the ones I'd once had. The press called it Eleanor's Revolution, and I embraced it. Every grant, every success, was a reminder that I didn't need a title to change the world. Alistair visited one afternoon, his eyes twinkling with pride. You've built something extraordinary. Eleanor, your father would be proud. I smiled, thinking of the man who'd taught me to fight for what I believed in. I hope so. Alistair patted my hand. He is, and so am I. Margaret's name faded from the city's elite circles, her influence a memory. Lillian reached out occasionally, her gratitude genuine. Theodore sent a letter, apologizing for his role in Margaret's schemes. I forgave them, not for their sake, But for mine, holding on to anger was a weight I didn't need. A year after the gala, I stood at a podium, addressing a crowd of investors and innovators. Cresthaven Ventures had become a powerhouse, its name synonymous with progress. I spoke of resilience, of building something from nothing, of never letting anyone define your worth. The crowd applauded, their respect hard-earned. Afterward, a young woman approached me, her eyes bright with ambition. "Miss Vayne, you inspired me to start my own company." "Thank you," I smiled, seeing myself in her, a reminder of why I'd fought. "Keep going," I told her. "You're stronger than you know." That night, I returned to the penthouse, my home, my sanctuary. I stood at the window, the city a canvas of light and possibility. I'd faced the Cresthaven Dynasty and won, not by becoming them, but by surpassing them. I was Eleanor Vayne, and this was my story, a tale of fire, forged in the ashes of their world. The second anniversary of the gala came quietly. I was no longer the woman who'd stood trembling at Cresthaven's gates. I was a force, a name whispered with respect, not disdain. Cresthaven Ventures had expanded globally, its influence rivaling the old dynasties. I'd built schools, funded startups, changed lives. My legacy was no longer tied to the Cresthavens. It was mine alone. Alistair called, his voice warm. "You've done more than I ever dreamed." "Eleanor." I laughed, the sound free. "I had a good mentor." He chuckled. "And I had a better student." We spoke of the past, of the lessons he'd taught me, of the strength I'd found within myself. Margaret was a footnote now, her estate sold, her name forgotten. I walked through the city that evening, the air crisp with autumn. The stars above were a reminder of the night I'd claimed my place, the night I'd chosen myself. I didn't need the Cresthaven's approval, their world, their name. I was Eleanor Vayne, and that was enough. The years passed, each one a testament to my resilience. Cresthaven Ventures became a global leader, its profits funding initiatives that changed lives. I traveled, spoke, inspired. Women wrote to me, their stories echoing my own tales of overcoming, of defying those who sought to diminish them. I answered every letter, knowing the power of a single voice. Lillian and Theodore rebuilt their lives, free from Margaret's shadow. They sent Christmas cards, small gestures of reconciliation. I kept them, not out of sentiment, but as a reminder of how far I'd come. Julian's name surfaced occasionally, a failed venture here, a quiet retreat there. I wished him no ill, but I felt no pity. He'd made his choices. Alistair remained a constant, his wisdom a guiding light. We met often, reminiscing over whiskey and memories. "You've changed the world." "Eleanor," he said one evening. I smiled, raising my glass. "I just changed my world." The rest followed. One spring evening, I hosted a gala of my own, not at Cresthaven, but in a sleek venue I'd designed a symbol of my empire. The guest list was diverse. Entrepreneurs, artists, dreamers, not just the elite. Alistair attended, his pride evident. Lillian and Theodore came too, their presence a quiet acknowledgement of my victory. As I spoke to the crowd, I saw the young woman from years ago, now a successful CEO. She raised her glass to me, a silent thank you. I nodded, my heart full. This was my legacy, not wealth or titles, but impact, connection, change. Margaret's world had been built on exclusion. Mine was built on possibility. Later, alone in the penthouse, I stood at the window, the city a sea of light. I thought of the girl I'd been, the one who'd stood at Cresthaven's gates, trembling but unbowed. She'd fought for this moment, and I honored her by living it fully. The world kept turning, and I with it. Cresthaven Ventures launched a new initiative, funding education for underserved communities. The press called it revolutionary, but to me, it was personal, a tribute to my father, who'd believed in the power of knowledge. I visited the first school, watching children laugh and learn, their futures bright with possibility. Alistair joined me, his health fading but his spirit strong. "You've built something lasting." "Eleanor," he said, his voice soft. I squeezed his hand. "We built it together." He smiled, his eyes bright with tears. "No, my dear, this is yours." Margaret's name was a ghost now, her influence erased. I didn't hate her, I pitied her. A woman so consumed by control, she'd lost everything. Julian sent a letter, a final plea for forgiveness. I read it, then burned it. Some bridges weren't worth crossing. The 5th anniversary of the gala was a quiet milestone. I marked it alone, with a glass of wine and a view of the city I'd conquered. Cresthaven Ventures was a titan. Its impact felt worldwide. I'd become a mentor, like Alistair had been to me, guiding young women through a world that tried to break them. I thought of the gala, of Margaret's smirk, Julian's silence. They were shadows now, their power stripped away. I'd won, not by becoming them, but by surpassing them. My life was my own, built on my terms, my strength. I raised my glass to the stars, a silent vow to keep going, to keep fighting, to keep being Eleanor Vayne. A decade after the gala, I stood at the helm of an empire that dwarfed Cresthaven's legacy. My foundation had funded thousands of dreams, from startups to schools to shelters. The world knew my name, not as Julian's wife, but as Eleanor Vayne, visionary, leader, force. Alistair had passed the year before. His death, a quiet ache in my heart. At his funeral, I'd spoken of his impact, his belief in me. He saw me when no one else did. I'd said, my voice steady. He taught me to see myself. The crowd had nodded, their respect a testament to his legacy and mine. Lillian and Theodore thrived, their lives their own. Margaret was gone, her estate a museum, her name forgotten. Julian was a whisper, a cautionary tale. I didn't think of them often, but when I did, it was with clarity. They'd shaped me, not by their love, but by their betrayal. I traveled to Paris that spring, speaking at a global summit on innovation. The crowd was vast, their applause thunderous. I spoke of resilience, of building something from nothing, of never letting anyone define your worth. Afterward, a young woman approached, her eyes bright. You changed my life. Miss Vayne, I smiled, my heart full. You'll change the world. That night, I walked along the Seine, the city glowing around me. I thought of the girl who'd stood at Cresthaven's gates, her heart pounding, her future uncertain. She'd fought for this moment, and I honored her by living it. The stars above were the same, but I was not. I was Eleanor Vayne, and I was free. Back in the city, I launched a new initiative, a mentorship program for young women in business. Hundreds applied, their stories echoing my own. I met with them, shared my journey, showed them they didn't need a title to shine. One girl, barely 20, reminded me of myself fierce, hungry, unafraid. You're going to be unstoppable, I told her. She grinned, her eyes bright with fire. Clara joined me for dinner, her hair grayer, but her spirit unchanged. You've built something bigger than Cresthaven ever was, she said. I nodded, raising my glass, and I'm just getting started. We laughed, the sound free, unburdened. The past was a shadow, the future a canvas. The 20th anniversary of the gala came and went, a quiet milestone. I was older now, my hair streaked with silver, but my fire burned brighter than ever. Cresthaven Ventures was a global force, its impact felt in every corner of the world. My foundation had changed millions of lives, and I was proud, but not finished. I visited Alistair's grave, laying flowers on the stone. You saw me, I whispered. Thank you. The wind carried my words, a gentle acknowledgement. I thought of Margaret, Julian, the world I'd left behind. They were gone, but I remained, a testament to my own strength. One evening, a young journalist interviewed me for a biography. How did you do it? She asked. How did you rise from nothing to this? I smiled, leaning back. I believed in myself, even when no one else did. I fought for my place, and I never let anyone take it from me. She scribbled furiously, her eyes wide. And the Cresthavens, I laughed. They thought they could break me. They were wrong. After she left, I stood at the penthouse window, the city a sea of light. I'd built this life, brick by brick, from the ashes of their world. I was Eleanor Vayne, merchant's daughter, empire builder, survivor, and I was enough. The stars above the city were bright, a reminder of the night I'd stood at Cresthaven's gates, trembling but unbowed. Now, decades later, I was no longer that girl. I was a woman who'd faced a dynasty and won, who'd built an empire from nothing, who'd changed the world by refusing to be small. I raised a glass to the sky, a silent toast to the journey, the battles, the victories. Margaret was gone, her cruelty a memory. Julian was a shadow, his silence a lesson. Alistair's faith had carried me, but it was my own strength that had brought me here. I was Eleanor Vayne, and this was my story. A tale of fire, forged in the ashes of their world, burning brighter than ever.